They thought Jack Roar was finished, just another war-worn veteran drifting through life on scraps of work. A man whose silence weighed heavier than his scars, forgotten by the town that once welcomed him home. But on a night when Iron Creek was swallowed by a howling storm, fate tore open the ordinary. In the blinding snow, Jack stumbled upon a black stallion the size of a myth, its body broken, blood staining the white, eyes burning with the last stubborn flame of life. Most men would have turned away. Jack did not. He knelt, hands shaking, and chose to save it. From that moment, the land itself seemed to shudder awake. Whispers curled through the timberline, hoofbeats echoed where no herd should be, and shadows moved across the ridges like ancient ghosts returning. Iron Creek had always been a place of grit and whiskey, where winter was a siege and survival a gamble. But no one in that frozen town could have guessed what Jack's choice unleashed, that a single act of mercy would tether his name to a legend greater than any soldier's tale. For the black stallion was not just dying, it was hunted. And by saving it, Jack Roar had unknowingly lit a fire that would drag Iron Creek into a storm far darker than snow. The Roar farm lay on the outskirts of town. A few crumbling fences, a roof, patched more with tar paper than shingles, and a barn that leaned as though one more storm would bring it down. Ethan kept a handful of cattle alive through sheer will, though the beasts were gaunt and restless. The horse stalls had been empty for years, doors hanging loose on their hinges. Jack's presence there was tolerated more than welcomed. Ethan often muttered that his brother had come back from war with nothing but ghosts. Jack said little in reply. Words were wasted in their house. Silence was easier. He kept to himself, rising early, carrying his old army jacket against the wind, and venturing into the woods with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He hunted for venison, sometimes rabbit, anything to fill their table. Hunting was not just necessity, it was survival in the wilderness and in himself. The stillness of the forest was the only place his mind found quiet. That morning, snow swept down in thick sheets, stinging his face as he followed the trail leading north. The rifle hung from his gloved hand, steady despite the cold. He bent to study faint deer tracks pressed into the drift, almost lost to the storm. Each step carried him deeper into the timberline, past skeletal pines and frozen creeks glazed like shattered glass. He had no company but the crunch of his boots and the distant groan of wind through the branches. The world narrowed to breath and snow. He kept his eyes on the tracks, pushing forward until the forest opened into a ravine cut with jagged stone. That was when he saw it. At first, it looked like a dark mound, half buried in the snow. Then the mound shifted. Jack's breath caught as the shape resolved into the body of a horse, or something more than a horse. It was enormous, unlike any stallion he had seen in all his years. Its shoulders were broad as a wall, legs, long and powerful, though twisted now in pain. Black fur, once gleaming, was soaked with ice and blood. A tangled mane spread across the snow like spilled ink. Its flank bore a wound. A bullet had carved through the ribs, leaving blood frozen in sheets across its side. The creature struggled weakly, each exhale a plume of frost in the storm. Eyes half closed, yet within them burned a flicker, a stubborn ember, refusing to die. Its hooves scraped the ground in feeble defiance, leaving grooves in the snow. Jack froze the rifle, lowering against his chest. The sight gripped him with awe and dread. This was not a simple beast fallen in the snow. It looked like something older, something belonging to the myths whispered around campfires. A shadow given flesh, boots crunched, and behind him. Ethan emerged from the tree's rifle slung across his back, cheeks raw from the wind. He squinted at the creature and gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "Christ, Jack," he muttered. "Would you look at the size of it?" Jack said nothing. His eyes never left. The stallion. Ethan circled closer, examining the wound. Hide like that, worth a fortune. Sell the skin, we'd buy hay for the whole winter. Maybe even mend the damn roof. Jack's jaw clenched. His breath rose in mist. "It's dying," Ethan pressed. "Better we put a bullet in it and make use of what's left." But Jack did not raise his rifle. He stepped forward instead, dropping to one knee in the snow. The cold bit through his pants, but he ignored it. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out and laid a calloused hand against the horse's neck. The flesh beneath his palm was trembling but warm. A faint heartbeat pulsed beneath the surface, thready and fragile, yet insistent. The stallion shivered, but it did not pull away. Its eye rolled toward him, golden and dim surging. And in that moment, Jack was no longer in Wyoming. He was back in the desert heat, pressing against his armor, dust choking his throat. The world roared with gunfire. Men shouted, fell, bled. And Sergeant Cole, his steady voice above the chaos, shouted into Jack's ear, "Don't you ever leave the dying." Jack remembered the weight of his friend's body, the desperate pull to drag him behind, cover the way Cole's breath rattled against his shoulder until it stopped. The memory struck like lightning searing through the years. He blinked, and the vision blurred with a sight before him. The stallion sprawled in the snow breath, stuttering, eyes pleading. Jack bowed his head. The storm screamed around him, but his decision cut through the noise like a blade. He would not turn away. Not again. Ethan's voice snapped behind him, sharp with irritation. "Jack, what the hell are you doing?" Jack's hand lingered on the horse's neck. His voice, when it came, was rough, but certain. "It's still alive, barely." Ethan scoffed. "That thing's good, is gone. Best we take what we can before the wolves get it." Jack looked over his shoulder. His eyes were dark, unyielding. Number, the word hung in the air, final and immovable. Ethan threw up his hands. "You're mad. You'll waste time and risk both our skins. That beast can't be saved." But Jack was already pulling off his pack, already searching for cloth for anything to press against the wound. The horse shuddered, but his hand steadied it, whispering low, almost to himself. "Easy, easy, old friend. I've been here too. I know what it's like to bleed into the dirt and wait for someone to choose whether you're worth saving." His voice trembled, not from the cold, but from something raw and unguarded. The stallion's eye blinked slowly. Its breath fluttered against his arm. Jack drew a long breath, shoulders tight. His decision was no longer just instinct. It was a vow pulled from the ashes of war and planted here in the snow of Wyoming. "I won't leave you," he whispered. Ethan's voice cut through the storm. Jack and his brother barked, rifle raised. "Call Sheriff Maddox." Jack's fingers dug deeper into the thick blood-matted mane. "It's alive." "Alive?" Ethan spat into the snow. "Barely. It's a monster. That's what it island. And if it ain't dead yet, it's dangerous." The stallion stirred, a ragged sound rattling in its chest. Jack's throat tightened. "It's not done fighting," Ethan swore under his breath. "You've lost your mind. War scrambled your head worse than I thought." He stepped closer, the muzzle of his rifle tilting toward the beast. "One shot, quick and clean, and we walk away with enough to keep this family from starving. Don't you dare stand in my way, Jack." Jack turned his body, shielding the fallen animal. Snow lashed his face, but his voice was low, steady. "I won't let you kill it." For a moment, the only sounds were the storm and the heavy, faltering breaths of the horse. Ethan's jaw clenched, rage burning in his eyes, but Jack didn't flinch. "You'll drag us both down for this," Ethan hissed. "You'll bury us in debt and ruin." Jack said nothing. He only pressed his hand firmer against the stallion's neck, sealing the decision that had already been made in his bones. Dragging the beast was like dragging a mountain. Jack looped a rope beneath its chest, pulling tight with hands stiffened by frost. The stallion groaned, shuddering, as he tried to rise, but its legs buckled, collapsing back into the snow. "Up!" Jack urged, heaving with all his strength. "Come on, one more." The horse lurched forward a step, then another, leaving a trail of red that spattered across the white ground. Each stride was agony. Jack's boots sinking deep, his muscles screaming, breath pouring from him in clouds. The rope cut into his shoulders, the weight behind him relentless. Ethan lasted no more than a 100 yard, before throwing up his hands. "This is madness," he barked, turning away. "Do what you want, Jack. Freeze out here with it for all I care. Don't come crawling to me when the town finds out you've been hiding a monster in our barn." His figure vanished into the blur of snow, leaving Jack alone. Alone with the weight of his choice, alone with the Jack beast that staggered behind him. Step by step, he dragged it. The storm tore at his coat, numbed his fingers, blinded his eyes, but he did not stop. Behind him, the stallion stumbled, fell, rose, again. Each collapse sent Jack rushing to its side, murmuring words he hadn't spoken to any living thing in years. "You can make it just a little further. Don't quit on me now." Blood spattered across the snow, marking their trail like a scar through the wilderness. Jack's body moved on. Instinct, and the same stubbornness that had carried him through firefights and desert marches, now pushing him across this frozen wasteland. By the time the outline of the farm appeared through the storm, his lungs burned like fire, and his legs threatened to buckle. At last, the sagging roof of the old stable rose before them, a skeleton of rotted wood and broken shingles abandoned long ago. Jack pulled the stallion through its doors and lowered it gently onto the float. Straw-littered floor. His arms trembled. His breath came in ragged gasps, but a fierce relief washed over him. He had done it. The stable smelled of mildew and dust. The walls leaned inward, and gaps between the boards led in slivers of snow that melted into the dirt floor. Once Ethan had kept horses here, but the stalls had fallen silent for years. Now, it would serve again, not as a barn, but as a sanctuary. Jack shoveled the old straw into a mound, layering it thick beneath the stallion. He patched the holes in the walls with planks, rigged a canvas across the draftiest gap, and lit a lantern whose glow wavered in the gloom. The great black body lay sprawled across the straw sides, heaving breath steaming in the cold. Its wound oozed, steadily staining the bedding beneath. Jack knelt beside it, setting down his pack. The night had only begun. By lamplight, Jack set to work. He tore strips from his own coat, the fabric stiff with years of use, and pressed them against a coat. The bleeding flank. The horse groaned, hooves clattering against the boards, but Jack leaned. Close, boy, steady. Easy, friend. Easy. I know it hurts. He melted snow over the lantern flame, dipping a rag into the warm water and scrubbed away the clotted blood. The wound revealed itself deep, ugly, but not fatal. A bullet had carved a channel, through flesh, missing the bone by a whisper. Jack grimaced. He had seen worse. He had survived worse. Taking up his knife, he steadied his hands and probed gently. The stallion flinched, eyes flashing in pain, but made no effort to strike. Jack worked quickly, prying free a fragment of lead buried in the wound. He tossed it aside, then pressed clean cloth into the gash, binding it with strips torn from his undershirt. His breath fogged the air as he tightened the knot. When he was finished, he rested his palm against the animal's throat. The pulse beat faint, but firm. Jack's voice broke into a whisper. "You'll make it. You hear me? I've been here too. Desert sun, burning down blood in the dirt, thinking it was the end. I was saved because someone didn't walk away. Now, it's my turn." The stallion's ear flicked at the sound of his voice. Jack gathered straw, piling it over the horse's body to keep out the cold. He sat beside it, lantern casting a dim circle around them, and stayed there through the long night. His eyelids grew heavy, his body begged for rest, but he refused. Each time the stallion stirred or groaned, Jack murmured to it words more for himself than for the animal. "You're not alone, not while I'm here." Outside, the wind howled against the boards. Inside, man and beast shared their breath at the rhythm of two survivors, locked in fragile alliance. Dawn came pale and brittle light, leaking through the cracks in the wood. Jack stirred, stiff from the cold. His eyes fell instantly to the stallion. The animal still lay there, but its breathing was steady now, its flank no longer bleeding. Relief surged through him. He leaned close hand, brushing the thick mane. "You made it through the night." The horse twitched, nostrils flaring, but did not recoil. Jack's lips curved into something he hadn't felt in years, the ghost of a smile. "This stays between us," he murmured. "You and me. As long as you breathe, I'll see you through." He rose, pushing the stall door shut, sliding the rusty bolt into place. From this moment that the stable was no longer abandoned. It was a fortress for a secret, a sanctuary for a vow. Outside, Ethan and the rest of Iron Creek could never know. Not Maddox, not the hunters, not the neighbors who whispered at the saloon. This was Jack's burden alone, his secret, his mission. Every evening when Ethan was nursing whiskey by the stove or snoring in his bedroll, Jack slipped outside. He carried buckets of water, armfuls of hay stolen from the cattle's feed, and disappeared into the skeletal shadow of the abandoned stable. Ethan noticed. He noticed the water, barrel dropping lower each morning. The bales in the loft shrinking faster than they should. He noticed the faint reek of blood that clung to Jack's coat, the dark stains on cloth rags left soaking in the wash basin. At first, he told himself it was nothing more than Jack fussing with the cattle or cleaning his rifle. But suspicion grew like rot. One morning, before the sun had risen, Ethan pulled on his boots and followed. Snow creaked beneath his steps as he kept his distance, watching his brother's hunched figure trudging through the drifts, a bucket swinging from each hand. Jack disappeared into the sagging shape of the stable, and a moment later, a muffled sound reached Ethan's ears, a deep, ragged breath, followed by the scrape of hooves against wood. Ethan froze, his stomach dropped. The monster. Jack hadn't let it die. He dragged it here, kept it alive under their very noses. Fury rose hot and fast. Ethan stormed forward, shoved open the stable door, and the truth lay bare before him. The stallion, black as midnight, enormous, even sprawled across the straw, lifted its head weakly. Its wound was no longer oozing a crust of dried blood sealing the gash. Jack knelt beside it, wiping the hide, with a rag soaked in water. He didn't flinch when the door banged against the wall. He didn't even look up. "What the hell are you doing?" Ethan's voice cracked like a whip, filling the gloom. "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" Jack's hand moved in slow circles across the horse's flank. Steady, deliberate. It's healing. Healing. Ethan's eyes blazed. He jabbed a finger toward the stallion. "That thing is a curse. You've dragged it into our barn like some kind of pet. Do you know what happens if Maddox finds out? If the town finds out, they'll hang us both as traitors." Jack finally lifted his gaze. His face was calm, almost eerily so, but his eyes, gray and tired, burned with something immovable. "It deserves to live," he said quietly. Ethan barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Live, it's a beast, Jack. A beast that'll bring the whole town down on us." "God almighty, you've gone mad. War fried your brain worse than I thought." Jack went back to cleaning the wound rag, dripping red into the straw. "Maybe, but I won't let it die here." Ethan's boots pounded against the boards as he stepped closer, breath steaming with fury. "You want to ruin us both. You want to give Maddox the rope to strangle this family. You've always been reckless, Jack, always. And now you're playing saint with a monster that should have been left to die in the snow." Jack's voice was steady low. "It's not a monster. It is to them," Ethan roared. "To the town, to Maddox, to every rancher who's lost stock to the wild herds. Do you know what they'll say when they hear you've been nursing one in secret? They'll say you've betrayed Iron Creek for a lump of hide and bone." Jack finally stood. The rag fell from his hand, splattering blood on the floor. He faced Ethan, shoulders squared his frame, lean but unyielding. "I don't care what they say." Their eyes locked. Ethan's chest heaved with anger, Jack's with quiet defiance. The air between them felt like a drawn blade, sharp, quivering, ready to cut. Ethan's voice dropped cold as the wind outside. "You're going to get us killed." Jack's reply was soft, but it landed like a hammer. "Maybe I should have been dead already." The words hung heavy in the stable. The stallion shifted, groaning low, and the sound filled the silence that followed. Ethan's anger faltered, replaced by confusion. "What the hell does that mean?" Jack's gaze drifted past his brother, unfocused, as though he were staring through time. His voice cracked as he spoke, roughened by something buried deep. "There was a boy," Jack said. "A kid, barely 20. We were pinned down outside Fallujah. He caught one in the gut, bat, blood everywhere. He begged me not to leave him, but I looked at him and I thought, no way he makes it. No way. Anyone could live through that. I left him." Ethan's face tightened. Jack's hand shook as he gestured toward the stallion. 2 days later, they found his body. He'd crawled a mile on his hands and knees before he bled out. A mile, Ethan. He might have lived if I'd stayed. Might have. But I made the choice for him, and I've heard his voice in my head every night since. The stable was silent, but for the rasp of the horse's breath. Jack's voice dropped to a whisper. "I won't do it again. Not to this one. Not to anything that's still fighting to breathe." For a long moment, Ethan stared. The anger drained from his eyes, replaced by something heavier, something closer to sorrow. He had always thought his brother's silence was stubbornness, that the war had left him cold. He had never guessed what kind of ghosts clung to him. "You've carried that all these years," Ethan said quietly. Jack didn't answer. His hand returned to Bloggs, the stallion's neck, stroking gently as if grounding himself in the present. Ethan looked at the animal, its massive frame rising and falling, the faint fire still flickering in its eye, and for the first time, doubt cracked his certainty. He exhaled long and ragged and rubbed a hand across his face. "Christ, Jack, you're going to tear us apart with this." Jack's shoulders slumped. "Then let it be on me." Ethan studied him a moment longer, then shook his head. His voice was weary now, not angry. "Fine, you keep your secret. But if anyone comes asking, I don't know a damn thing. You hear me? You take the blame alone." Jack nodded once. "I will." Ethan's eyes lingered on him, a flicker of regret passing across his face before he turned away. "Do what you want, Jack, but don't drag me down with you." He left the stable, the door creaking shut behind him. The silence that followed was thick. Jack stood alone again, beside the horse that shifted faintly in the straw. His chest rose and fell, slow, steady. The stable was now divided ground. For Ethan, it was forbidden, a place to be avoided, erased from thought. For Jack, it was sanctuary, a crucible where his ghosts met flesh and blood. He sank onto the straw beside the stallion, running a hand through its tangled man. "It's just you and me now," he murmured, "and I'll see it through." Jack rose each morning before Ethan stirred his boots, crunching over the way, frozen yard, as he carried water to the old stable. The air inside was damp and sharp, but warmer than the open fields, and every day the stallion met him with just a little more strength than the last. The wound along Shadow's flank, once a gaping, bloody ruin, began to knit itself shut. The flesh drew tight, scabbed, and healed. Where patches of hair had been shaved away or torn by bullet and blade, new black fur pushed through, gleaming even in the thin lamplight. At first, the horse could barely lift his head. Then, one day, staggering, he pushed to his knees. A week later, he took 2 trembling steps across the straw. Jack stood rooted to the floor, hardly, breathing as the beast tested his own weight hooves slipping on the boards. He wanted to cheer, but didn't. He only whispered, "Easy, boy, easy, you'll get there." The changes came in small mercies. One dawn, as Jack pushed through the stable door, Shadow tossed his head and loosed a soft, tentative whicker as if greeting him. Another evening, Jack reached for the thick mane and found the horse bowing his neck, accepting the touch instead of shying away. For Jack, it felt like grace, like something divine had taken notice of his stubborn refusal to abandon the dying. Watching Shadow heal was like watching himself crawl back from the edge. He saw in the stallion's slow recovery a mirror of his own battered spirit, a reminder that the broken could endure if someone just stayed beside them long enough. The storm broke 3 weeks later. Rain hammered the warped boards of the Nan line stable. Wind screamed through the eaves, shaking the roof until snow slid off in sheets. Lightning tore the sky wide open, followed by thunder that rolled down the valley like cannon fire. Jack sat, hunched on a stool, sharpening a knife in the dim glow of the lantern. He meant only to stay until the worst of it passed. But then came the sound, a low, guttural groan deep in the stallion's chest. Shadows shifted violently, hooves striking sparks on the boards. His sides heaved, foam spraying from his lips. Jack shot to his feet. "Easy, steady now," he urged, rushing forward. His first thought was that the wound had reopened, that infection had set in. He seized the lantern, held it close, and scanned the stallion's flank. The scar was sealed, the blood long gone, but Shadow's belly heaved. Unnaturally, the great barrel of his body rippling as though something inside twisted and fought to get free. Jack froze, his hand dropped useless at his power. Sighed. "Oh, Christ," he breathed. You're not sick." The truth slammed into him harder than any shell burst. Shadow wasn't dying. Shadow was giving birth. Panic surged, raw and unpracticed. Jack had never foaled a mare in his life. He had seen calves born once help drag, a lamb free of its mother in the mud. But this was something else entirely. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the stable shook with the thrashing of hooves. Shadow's scream cut through the thunder, a sound so fierce it raised the hairs on Jack's arms. He snatched up every scrap of knowledge he could recall, not from farms, but from war. He remembered wounded men gasping for air, doctors shouting for clean cloth, the way he'd been told to keep pressure, keep calm, keep the blood flowing, keep the soldier alive. Until the medics arrived, there would be no medics tonight. Only him and a horse the size of a tank, fighting to deliver life into the world. He shoved straw across the floor, piling it thick to make a bed. He melted snow over the lantern, poured the water into a tin basin, grabbed the old rags he'd used to bind wounds. His hands shook, but he forced them steady. "It's all right," he muttered, his voice cracking. "We'll get through it. Girl, you and me." The mare's flanks convulsed. She slammed her hooves against the board's eyes, rolling white in terror. Jack darted close, risking a blow, and laid both hands against her neck. "Breathe," he said. "Just breathe. You've carried this far. Don't quit on me now." The storm roared in answer. Thunder rolled like a drumbeat of doom. The stable filled with heat, sweat, steam rising from the horse's massive body. Jack worked in rhythm with her, mopping her sides, speaking constantly, words tumbling out, half prayer, half command. Hours bled away, measured in lightning, flashes, and the stallion's tortured cries. Jack's back screamed from stooping. His hands blistered from clutching the rope, tied across her chest to steady her. He could feel her weakening. He could feel the life within her straining to break free. "Come on," he begged, forehead pressed to her shoulder. "Come on, girl, push." And then, through the cacophony of thunder and the hammer of hooves, a new sound split the air, a shrill, piercing whinny. Jack's head snapped up. On the straw lay a trembling bundle of wet gray hide, legs folded awkwardly beneath, a foe alive, gasping, fighting to stand. Jack staggered back, breath catching. My God! But it wasn't over. Shadows screamed again, and Jack realized the battle had only begun. They came one by one, like gifts torn from the storm. The second slid into the world with a grunt and a spray of fluid darker than the first. Jack wiped its face, rubbed life into its sides, until it coughed and made strong lungs declaring its arrival. The third followed in a rush, a restless creature whose legs kicked before it had even cleared the birth sac, flailing against Jack's chest until he laughed half hysterical as he dragged it to its mother's side. And then came the last. The final foe emerged in silence. Jack feared the worst. He tore at the membranes with shaking hands, rubbed the tiny body fiercely desperate. When the foe's eyes blinked open, he froze. They glowed pale, almost luminous, and the coat, snow-white from head to tail, shone ghost-like in the lantern light. The foe lifted its head and impossibly looked directly at him. Jack's breath hitched. "Ash," he whispered the name spilling out. Unbidden. "You'll be Ash." He worked feverishly, drying them all with rough cloth, nudging them toward their mother's belly. One by one, the foss latched on, finding milk, their tails flicking weakly. The storm raged on outside, but within. The stable there was only the frantic, beautiful chaos of new life. He looked at them in awe, the first a slate-gray colt already wobbling to his feet with remarkable determination. Jack muttered, "Storm suits you," as the commendation. Little one shook droplets from his ears and whickered boldly. The second black as coal thick set even. For a newborn, his whinny deep and resonant. Cola Jack said simply, and the foe stamped. A tiny hoof, as if in agreement. The third ruddy brown with a sheen of fire in his coat, eyes darting and legs restless even as he suckled. Ember Jack decided, wiping sweat from his brow. And then, Ash, standing last, but staring. Most fiercely white fur, glowing under the lantern, as though the storm itself had carved him from lightning. Jack knelt among them, his hands trembling as he stroked damp necks, smoothed ears, as rubbed warmth into tiny flanks. He had never seen anything like it, never felt so close to something beyond human comprehension. By the time the storm began to fade, the stable was filled with sound, shadows, exhausted, breathing. On the hungry suckling of 4 faws, the occasional squeal as one tumbled against another. The air was thick with steam straw and the copper tang of blood, but it smelled like life, not death. Jack slumped back against the stall wall. Sweat and rain slicked his face, mingling with tears he hadn't realized he'd shed. He wiped a hand across his eyes and laughed, a cracked, incredulous laugh that startled the faws into silence for a moment before they resumed their nursing. The lantern light flickered, catching on their coats, making them shine like the enfast. Stars scattered across the straw. 4 fragile constellations born in a bat storm. Jack pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the hammer of his own heart. He looked at Shadow, lowered in exhaustion, but eyes watchful, proud. She had endured. She had given him more than survival. She had given him a miracle. "God Almighty," he whispered, voice breaking. "You're not just a horse. None of you are. You're proof. Proof that the world still has something worth believing in." His hands found the soft curve of Ash's neck, the foe's luminous eyes blinking up at him without fear. Jack's throat tightened. "You're going to change everything," he murmured. "I don't know how, but I can feel it." The storm moved east, thunder fading into distance, leaving only the drip of rain from the eaves. Inside the stable, Jack sat surrounded by the newborns, his war-scarred hands cradling fragile life. For the first time in years, he felt something swell in his chest. That was not grief, not guilt, not emptiness. Hope. The stable no longer felt like a tomb. It was alive now, restless, noisy, chaotic, in a way that pulled Jack Roar back from the edge of despair. Storm was always the first to greet him. The little gray colt darted around the straw, his legs too long for his own body. His voice a shrilled chatter of knickers that bounced off the rotting beams. He whirled in frantic circles, kicking up dust, his energy uncontainable. Cole was the opposite. Solid black, heavy, even for a foe. He loved to slam his shoulders against the wooden planks, as though testing the world's strength against his own. More than once, Jack had muttered. "You'll knock this whole damn place down if I don't reinforce it," while hammering loose boards back into place. Ember was the mischief maker. The reddish-brown coat caught the lamplight with fiery glints, and the colt's teeth were always busy gnawing on buckets, tugging at rope ends, and most often clamping onto the back of Jack's old coat. More than once, Jack stumbled forward with a gruff curse, only to hear Ember squeal with what felt like laughter. And then there was Ash, the white foe, pale as snowfall, his eyes carrying a strange glow that seemed far older than the weeks he had lived. He was quieter than the others, less frantic, less brutish. He would simply watch Jack unblinking as if weighing him. Some nights when Jack sat against the wall of the stable, Ash would wander, press his narrow head against the man's shoulder, and simply stay there. Jack never said it aloud, but those moments undid him. Feeding them was its own covert operation. Every day, Jack scraped a little hay from the stores meant for the cattle. He told Ethan the cows had taken ill that he was padding their troughs with extra feed. When he rode into town, he bought bundles of hay under the same excuse. A farmer with sick livestock was no scandal. No one thought to question it. Still, Jack kept his head low, his words short. The fewer eyes on him, the safer. They all were. At night, he slipped meat into his own meals, sparingly saving every scrap he could to mash into the feed for Shadow. She needed it. She was still rebuilding. Her strength in nursing 4 foes took everything she had. Her sides hollowed ribs stark against the black coat. Jack worried, but she endured patient and fierce eyes, never leaving her. Young. Each dawn he rose stiff and aching, but alive with purpose. He shoveled out dung, changed bedding, whispered to the foes, rubbed their legs to keep them strong. He knew every sound that they made, every tremor of their breath. The bond grew in silence and routine. Jack would sit long into the night against the warped stable wall, the lantern flickering at his side, the sounds of the foes, a lullaby unlike any he had known. When storm tore around the pen legs flashing, Jack thought of soldiers playing keep away with a canteen under desert stars. When Ember tugged at his sleeve teeth, worrying the fabric like a playful pup, he remembered the boyish pranks that had once echoed through barracks before war had burned the laughter out of them. And when Ash leaned his head against him, breathing steady and warm, Jack felt his chest tighten. "I thought there was nothing left worth protecting," he whispered once, voice cracking. The foe said nothing, only blinked those pale eyes, but the weight of his presence was answer enough. Shadow herself trusted him completely now. She no longer flinched when he touched her flank, no longer rolled her eyes when he stroked her neck. She let him handle the foes without protest. It was a soldier's kind of trust, absolute total given once and never withdrawn. To Jack, it felt like command. These weren't just animals, they were his unit, his charge, his new mission in a life that had seemed emptied of them. He was the last man standing, and it was his duty to keep them alive. But secrets rot when too many eyes draw near. Hank Rohr was the first to sniff trouble. Jack's uncle was a sodden ruin of a man perpetually leaning against some doorframe, stinking of whiskey, demanding coin or drink or both. He came stumbling up the path one afternoon, lips, loose eyes narrowed, and caught Jack carrying a bucket of water toward the old stable. "What have you got hidden there?" Hank jeered, swaying on his feet. "Gold or ghosts? Smells like both." Jack didn't answer. He simply brushed, past jaw clenched. But he knew the man's sharp little eyes had taken note. Hank was no fool when coin or whiskey was involved. If he thought there was profit in betrayal, he'd sell his own kin. Jack lay awake that night, listening to the foes rustle in the straw, his stomach clenched. Hank was a hazard, unpredictable, careless. A whisper from him could set the whole town sniffing around. The second spark came from Caleb Boone, the neighbor with more liquor than sense. Caleb was a permanent fixture at the saloon, his laugh booming, his stories wild. One winter night, drunk as a lord, he slammed his mug down and announced, "I swear on my mother's grave, I heard it. A monster horse screaming in the dark, down by the Rohr place, big as the devil himself." The men around him roared with laughter. "Caleb, you can't tell a crow from a cow when you're sober. You expect us to believe you drunk?" But a few of them remembered, and one of them happened to earn coin from Sheriff Maddox, whose hatred of wild horses was as well known as the cross on the church. The laughter faded into whispers, and whispers had a way of growing teeth. By week's end, the phrase barn ghost was passing from mouth to mouth. Some laughed when they said it, others didn't. Jack heard it himself one morning in town as he carried a sack of feed from the mercantile. 2 men by the well lowered their voices when he passed, but not quickly enough. Barn ghost at the Roar place. The words froze him. Mid-step. He forced himself to keep moving, eyes on the snow. Inside, his blood ran cold. When he returned, Ethan was waiting, arms crossed. "You hear what they're saying?" he asked flatly. Jack only nodded. Ethan's face was granite. "I told you before, if Maddox comes knocking, I'll sell you out before I lose this land. I won't be dragged down with you." Jack met his gaze, calm, almost weary. "I know." Ethan turned away, muttering curses. Under his breath, Jack said nothing more. He carried the feed to the stable, stroked Ash's neck, and thought, if they live, it's worth it. Every damn risk. But secrecy became its own, a kind of war. On nights when the moon rose full and cold, the foes' voices carried beyond the rotting boards. Their whinnies, shrill and bright, drifted into the frozen fields. The sound might have been joy, but to Jack it was dread. The gossip spread like fire in dry brush. Some swore they'd heard it too. An unearly whinny on a still winter night, long and shrill, as if it came from the pit of hell itself. Sounded like the horse in Revelations, one farmer muttered after Sunday's service, crossing himself for good measure. White is death or black as sin, depending on who heard it. It didn't matter that no one had seen anything. It was the sound, the idea that stuck. And ideas in a town like Iron Creek were dangerous things. By the time the rumor reached Sheriff Maddox, it was already sharpened into a weapon. Maddox was a man carved out of stone and gristle, 53 years old. His hair grayed at the temples, a scar slashing down his left cheek like a white river through canyon. Rock. His eyes burned with the bitterness of a man who had fought too many battles with the wild and never forgiven it for pushing back. For years, he had cursed the wild mustangs that roamed the plains, blaming them for broken fences, trampled crops, and stolen pasture. A strange horse on this land, he had declared more than once, is a threat to be stamped out before it breeds more trouble. So when the talk of a black beast hiding in Jack Roar's barn reached him, he listened. When whispers painted it as larger than any stallion, unnatural, a devil, his jaw clenched. "This ends," he said flatly, rising from his corner chair at the saloon. "Tomorrow night we hunt." The saloon thundered with approval. Maddox slammed his fist on the table, calling out names. Farmers, ranch hands, and hunters stepped forward, eager or greedy. It made no difference. Some wanted their livestock safe. Others thought of the bounty for a hide, that size the price of its meat and bones. Lanterns clattered onto tables. Rifles were oiled and checked. Ropes were coiled, their noose snapping shut with practice poles. Men drank deep and swore bloody oaths to tear down the ghost barn at the Roar place. By the time the lamps guttered low, half the town was buzzing with the war play promise of a spectacle. Jack heard of it the next afternoon. He had gone into town for salt and lamp oil, his collar pulled high against the wind. He kept his eyes down, but words floated up like daggers out of the crowd. Maddox says, "Tomorrow night, going to Roar's place. Tear that barn apart. See if the ghost horse screams." Jack's hands tightened around the sack of salt until the coarse paper nearly split. He walked home with deliberate calm, though his chest pounded as if he were already under fire. At the cabin, Ethan was waiting. His face was a storm cloud. "You hear it," he said. Jack set the sack on the table. He only nodded. "I told you," Ethan snapped. "I told you this secret would kill us. And now, Maddox is bringing half the town here. He'll find it, Jack. He'll hang you and he'll burn what's left." Jack didn't argue. He only went to the back door, his boots, crunching the frost, and crossed to the old stable. Inside, the foss stirred. Storm whinny a greeting. The ember bit at his sleeve. Cole slammed a hoof against the planks. Ash, quiet and watchful, lifted his pale head and locked eyes with him. In that gaze, Jack saw no fear, only a strange urgency, a push that went straight through his chest. He knew what it meant. "They can't stay," he murmured. "Not here, not after. All tonight." The escape began under a sickle moon. Jack waited until Ethan's snores filled the cabin. He wrapped his old army coat tight, struck the lantern low, and opened the stable door. The cold slapped him like a sheet of iron. His breath plummeted white as he led Shadow out her massive frame, looming in the half-dark. The foss came next storm, bouncing nervously, ember kicking at nothing coal, steady as stone, ash, stepping, silent with eyes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. "Easy, Jack," whispered, stroking shadows. And neck. "Quiet now." They moved across the snowy pasture, hooves muffled by drifts. The world was hushed, the air brittle with cold. Above all them, the stars were shards of glass, the moon a thin blade cutting the sky. Jack's heart hammered. Each gust of wind could have been the breath of a lantern flame. Each rustle in the grass could have been men following. He kept glancing back, half expecting to see torches bobbing through the night, rifles glinting, but there was only silence and the soft crunch of snow under hooves. The path he chose was one few knew, a hunter's trail that cut through a ravine and bent toward the Black Mesa Reserve. It was a harsh land of basalt ridges and wind-cored stone, avoided by most ranchers. The grass was thin, the ground broken, but it was wild, and in its jagged folds, one could hide. The foes stumbled, regrouped, shadow nickered low, keeping at them close. Storm darted ahead. Ember nipped at his brother's flank. Coal trudged with patient steps, and Ash walked like a ghost, leading them all, his pale body glimmering faint against the dark rock. Jack trudged beside them, his breath, ragged shoulders burning from the strain. Yet, in his mind, it was war again. He was no longer a ranch hand sneaking through snow, but a soldier guiding his squad out of encirclement. Each step was a retreat under threat of annihilation. Each glance over his shoulder carried the dread of gunfire sparking in the dark. Hours later, when his body screamed for rest, the dark outline of the mesa loomed. Black cliffs rose like a fortress. Jack found a hollow among the rocks, a natural alcove shielded from the wind. He spread dry brush and hay he had carried in a sack, arranging it as best he could. Shadow lay down heavily, her sides shuddering. The foes collapsed against her, breathing fast. Jack sank to his knees and pressed a hand to Shadow's mane. "Here," he whispered, "safer than the barn. I'll come back for you, I promise." Her eye rolled toward him, calm despite exhaustion. Ash lifted his head once more, eyes shining, and Jack felt as if the foe had understood every word. He stood harding and forced himself to walk away. Dawn came with boots on the porch. The cabin door shook under heavy fists. Roar Sheriff Maddox bellowed, "Open up!" Ethan staggered to the door, face pale, and pulled it open. Maddox stood there, with near a dozen men rifles, gleaming lantern, still burning despite the morning light. Their faces were grim, expectant. "We're here for your barn," Maddox said. Ethan swallowed. "All we've got are a few sick cows, nothing else." Maddox's lip curled. "We'll see." He marched across the yard. The men followed Boots, crunching frost ropes coiled at their sides. Maddox's hand wrapped the lock on the old stable. With one wrench, the rusted iron snapped. The door groaned open. The men spilled inside. The lantern light revealed nothing but musty straw cobwebs and emptiness. Almost emptiness. On the dirt floor lay faint hoof marks, half hidden by raked straw. In one corner, a few black hairs clung to the splintered wood. Maddox crouched, plucked the hairs between two fingers, and lifted them into the light. His scarred face twisted. "It was here," he said, his voice low and venomous. He turned on Ethan. "You think you're clever hiding it, but we'll find it. And when we do, Roar, I'll put a bullet through its skull." The barn filled with the rasp of breath, the metallic click of rifles shifting. Ethan's mouth worked soundlessly. The mob muttered uneasy. A few looked at Ethan as though he were already guilty, already hiding something worse. By the following Sunday, gossip. It was no longer gossip, it was gospel. The details twisted with every telling. Some claimed the beast was taller than any barn door with fire in its nostrils. Others swore it had a mane white as bone, its hooves striking sparks that set the night aflame. No one agreed on what it looked like, but everyone agreed on where it was hidden. Jack Roar became less a man and more a story. Children were the cruelest. Whenever they passed the Roar farm, their voices carried over the fence posts. Barn, ghost, barn, ghost. Sometimes they threw stones at the sagging roof of the stable, then scattered, shrieking with laughter when the boards rattled. The adults were quieter, but no kinder. At the blacksmith's forge, Jack asked for a simple patch to his shovel blade. The smith wiped his hands and shook his head. Too busy, the lie sat heavy in the air. At the saloon, when Ethan tried to put a drink on credit, the barkeep only crossed his arms. No tabs for barn ghost's kin. The name stuck fast. One night, Ethan slammed his fist on the kitchen table, whiskey spilling over the rim of his glass. "You hear it, Jack. You hear what they call us now, barn ghost. That's on you. You've dragged our family through the combine. Mud." Jack only sat in silence, his face lost in the shadows of the lamp. He didn't defend himself, didn't deny it. The words cut, but he took them without protest. Shame bit at him at first. The children's jeers echoed in his ears when he worked the fields. Each avoided glance in town stung like a lash. He had worn uniforms, borne scars, carried the weight of survival through battles half a world away, and now here in the place he had once called home, he was reduced to a ghost in his own barn. But with time, he began to see the truth of it. The further the town pushed him into shadow, the safer the shadow became. The less they trusted him, the less they ventured near the old stable. Maddox's men stopped their surprise. Rides past the farm content that nothing could live so close to a man they despised. The gossip itself was a kind of camouflage. If they believed he was a ghost, then they would never find the living secret. So Jack bore the name as armor. He let the town spit it at him. Let children sing it like a curse. Every insult was another stone in the wall around the herd he protected. And the herd, though hidden, did not abandon him. The winter dragged on, cruel as ever. Reports trickled in of ranches losing, sheep fences splintered by wild mustangs, cattle scattered in the snow. The land was restless, the herds hungry, but not at the place. Ethan scratched his head when he counted the cattle. Not one missing, not one fence down. While neighbors cursed and patched posts, their ranch stood untouched. "It don't make sense," Ethan muttered one morning, staring out across the frost. "Everyone else loses stock, but not us." Jack didn't answer. He had already seen the signs. Once near dawn, he found a ring of hoof prints pressed into the snow at the edge of their pasture, large prints circling. Wide, deliberate, not a raid, a patrol. Another night, he followed the faint echoes of hoofbeats into the trees and glimpsed for just a heartbeat, a dark shape moving against the moonlight, a shadow with Foss flanking her, keeping watch, driving wild mustangs back into the hills. He said nothing of it to Ethan, but in his chest burned a quiet certainty Shadow had not forgotten. She had claimed the Roar land as territory, worth guarding. Her young were learning the same, weaving invisible fences stronger than any barbed wire. Jack stood one evening at the edge of the property, breath fogging in the bitter air, and saw the prints again, 4 smaller circles, and one great arc that belonged only to her. "They're protecting us," he whispered into the empty night. The irony cut deep. The town cursed him as a ghost and a traitor. But the reason their own stock had been ravaged was because the ghost's herd was out there in the snow, warding off the chaos. No man could stop. Jack returned to the stable that night, lantern in hand. The boards glowed amber, casting long shadows across his gaunt face. He sat on the straw, listening to the silence. There were no Foss now. The herd had grown strong enough to wander farther, but he could feel them, could almost hear their breath in the darkness. The name echoed in his ears again, Barn Ghost. He lowered his head into his hands and let the words settle into him. He was no longer soldier, no longer a rancher, no longer brother. The town had made him into something else. But if being a ghost kept the herd alive, if it kept Shadow and her 4 strange, miraculous young safe, then he would haunt this barn gladly until the end of his days. He lifted his lantern high, the flame trembling in the draft, and whispered to the empty stalls, "I'll carry the curse. You carry the land. That's the bargain." Years passed, and with them, the sharp edges of shame dulled into something else. Jack Roar had learned how to walk through Iron Creek with silence as his armor. The name Barn Ghost clung to him, like smoke whispered at his back in the mercantile, murmured by boys on the street. At first, the sting had nearly bent him double, but time and the steady, the beat of survival taught him to bear it. He found odd jobs where he could. Some men would not meet his eyes, but others grudgingly let him mend a fence line, split a cord of wood, or shovel the mountain of snow that banked against storefronts after every storm. He took the coins without complaint, nodding once, never asking for more. The people of Iron Creek never warmed to him, not truly. They still muttered and averted their gaze. But a few began to notice the steadiness in his work, the quiet way he showed up, and did what needed doing. A handful even stopped sneering when his name was mentioned. It did not matter much to Jack. What mattered was what waited beyond. Town, hidden in the dark ridges of Black Mesa, Every time his heart sank under the weight of scorn, he only had to remember the herd, remember Shadow's breath against his palm, remember the foe's bright eyes and restless cries. They were his unit, his family. The world could turn its back on him, but the wild had not. And so, when the wind carried a faint whinny through the night, or when he found fresh hoof prints pressed into snow near the edge of his land, Jack felt less alone. Somewhere out there, his comrades still live, still fought to hold their ground. And knowing that kept him alive, too. The visits became ritual. Jack told Ethan he was going after rabbits or setting traps when he slipped out with a pack slung over his shoulder. Ethan grunted but asked no questions anymore. His brother had accepted the barn ghost, mask as long as it kept the house standing. Jack followed narrow trails up into the basalt spires of Black Mesa. The climb was rough ankles twisting on, loose scree wind, cutting sharp through the gullies, but he moved with the endurance of a soldier on patrol. At the base of an old cedar and a hollowed-out rock, he left small offerings, a pinch of salt, a fistful of koa, grain, a bundle of hay tied with twine. Sometimes when the sun burned low, he would glimpse her shadow. She stood on the ridgy line, black mane tossed by the wind, golden eyes shining like lanterns. Behind her, shapes shifted foes longer. Foz, but growing strong. Storm was fleet and restless, darting up and down the slope. Ember danced with unspent energy, tossing his head, charging at phantoms. Cole trudged steady as an ox, anchoring the others. And Ash. Ash was almost never seen, but when Jack caught a glimpse, it struck him to the marrow. The white colt lingered at the edges, watching as if deciding when the time was right to step forward. Jack never tried to approach too close. He knew better. But he always went back down the trail with his heart lighter, his lungs fuller, as if each visit had scoured the ash of war from his chest. He would smile to himself, unheard by anyone but the wind, and think they're still there, still mine. On the mesa, time felt different. Jack sometimes sat for hours at the edge of a stone outcrop, the herd grazing in the distance. He would hold his knees in his arms and let his mind drift. Memories of war still came, but softer. Now, the screaming sandstorms, the bursts of fire, the faces of young men who had not come home. He thought of Sergeant Cole steady in the chaos, reminding him, don't abandon the dying. He looked at Shadow and saw a reflection of every soldier he had known. She had bled staggered, nearly fallen, but she had fought to live, and she had. Not only survived, she had built a force 4 strong lives who carried her spirit. Forward, not a horse, Jack muttered once watching her from the rocks. A comrade. You're no different than me. The thought stunned him with its truth. Shadow was not his rescue. She was his mirror. She had endured the wound, endured the storm, endured the exile. She knew what it meant to be left behind, and what it meant to keep going anyway. Some nights as he trudged home, he whispered into the darkness, maybe you saved me, not the other way around. The realization lifted something heavy inside him. For the first time in years, he felt again the pride of belonging to a unit, the sense of worth that war had stripped away. Not a soldier in uniform, not a brother despised by his own kin, but a man trusted by a herd no one else could touch. The turning point came one autumn evening. The air was crisp, the leaves brittle underfoot, and the moon hung huge and white over the mesa. Jack climbed higher than usual, his lantern unlit, letting the silver light guide his steps. And there he saw him, Ash. No longer a foe, the white stallion stood alone at top a ridge, his coat gleaming like fireless lightning mane, whipping in the cold wind. His body was tall, powerful, fully grown. But what struck Jack most were the eyes, bright, steady, unyielding, eyes that seemed to cut through distance and night alike. Jack froze. The stallion did not flee, and did not even shift his weight. He simply looked down at Jack, silent, immovable, as though this meeting had been long expected. The air between them trembled. Jack's chest rose and fell, his breath loud in his ears. Ash, he whispered. The name still felt new, but the horse tilted his head as if he knew it already. Jack's throat tightened. You remember me, don't you? I never forgot. The stallion stamped once, breath steaming like smoke in the moonlight. It was not fear, it was recognition. Jack felt tears sting his eyes. He had been called a ghost, shunned by the town, stripped of every honor he had once worn. Yet here, under the indifferent stars, he was seen and remembered. A man, not a shadow, a soldier with his unit intact. In that moment, Jack saw not just the present, but a future opening before him. Ash was no ordinary horse. He carried something larger, the poise of a leader, the bearing of a creature meant to stand above others. And he had chosen not to turn away. Jack stood straighter than he had in years. "I'll keep walking," he whispered. "As long as you're out there, I'll keep walking." The days after that sighting, things were different. Jack carried himself with a change so subtle, the town hardly knew what to make of it. He still shoveled snow-mended fences, split wood, but his back was straighter, his step firmer, his gaze less hollow. When whispers of barn ghost followed him, he no longer winced. Sometimes he even smiled faintly, as if the joke were his alone. For he knew the truth. Barn ghost might be all the town saw, but Ash saw more. Shadow saw more. The herd remembered that was enough. He began to offer his labor more freely in town, not to earn favor, but because he understood his value. He carried water for widows, fixed roofs for farmers who cursed him under their breath, dug graves when winter claimed, "It's dead." He did not do it for thanks. He did it because he knew he was not empty. He was the keeper of a secret, larger than Iron Creek itself. At night, as he sat by the stove with Ethan muttering across the table, Jack would hear the faint cry of a horse carried down from Black Mesa. His heart would lift, and he would think, not Ghost Guardian. And, in the privacy of his own thoughts, Jack Rohr felt himself again. Not the ruined veteran, not the town's shame, but the soldier reborn in a new company. A man with comrades still in the fight. The barn ghost had vanished. In his place stood a keeper of legend, unseen, but unbroken, bound forever to a herd that had given him back his life. 15. Winters had swept across Iron Creek since the night Jack Rohr led Shadow and her foes into the sheltering arms of Black Mesa. He was 62 now. His hair, once iron gray, had surrendered to snow white. His frame had thinned the bulk of his soldier's shoulders long gone, but his eyes had not dimmed. They were the same flinty gray that had stared down storms and battlefields alike. His gait was slower, his breath sometimes short, yet there was still something unbroken in the way he carried himself. The Rohr farm had emptied with the years. Ethan was gone, buried in the churchyard. 3 winters passed after a fever took him in the night. Hank had vanished long before that, drifting to some mining town where cheap whiskey still flowed. Jack lived alone now in the crooked farmhouse, its timbers groaning, its fences sagging. But he kept it alive in his stubborn, quiet way. Iron Creek had not forgotten his name. The children who had once mocked him grew into adults who repeated the stories of their parents. Barn host, they still called him, though not always with scorn. Time had softened the insult into something else. To some it was pity, to others a strange kind of respect. Jack had worn the name long enough that it became part of him like a scar, once painful, now simply part of the man. But beneath the years, beneath the mask of ghost and outcast, one light remained constant at the memory of the herd. He still dreamt of shadows, eyes glowing in the dark stable of the foes pressed against her side. He still felt their breath, still heard their cries echoing across snowbound fields. Whenever despair gnawed at him, he thought of them and remembered he had not lived in vain. Somewhere out there, his soldiers were still alive. In town, new rumors rose to replace the old. Black Mesa people whispered was no longer cursed ground, but sacred. Ranchers swore a strange herd roamed there, led by a stallion of impossible size and beauty. He was white as new snowman, flowing like silk eyes, shining bright even from a distance. Unlike the wild bands that plagued the valley, trampling fences, scattering cattle, stealing pasture, this herd had never touched the farms. They chased the raiders away, drove other horses from the borders, and left Iron Creek stock untouched. Some spoke of them as guardians. "A holy horse," muttered one farmer at the mercantile. "God's own sign watching over this town." Others remained wary. "Don't be fooled," another replied. "Devils wear white as easy as black. That's the ghost's beast. Mark my words." The monster grew and learned tricks. Jack listened from the back of the store, head bowed, fingers curled around the handle of his sack of flour. His heart hammered not with fear, but with recognition. It had to be Ash, the smallest foe, the quietest watcher, the one whose eyes had always pierced deepest, now grown into the stallion of legend. That night, Jack stood on the porch of the farmhouse, staring into the sweep of land beyond. The moon silvered the fields, turning the snow into a sea of light. He leaned heavily on the railing, his breath frosting in the chill. "It's time," he murmured, his voice cracked with age, but the resolve was sharp. Time to see you again, Ash. You again. He prepared with the simplicity of a man who knew his journeys were fewer now. He packed a lantern, his old army coat, patched at the elbows, and the weathered notebook he had filled over years with sketches and memories of Shadow and her brood. He tied them with twine and slung the bundle across his shoulder. The following night, with the moon hanging low and full, he set out. The trail to Black Mesa was one he could have walked blind. His boots crunched over frozen grass. His breath came, short, but his steps were steady. The land unfolded beneath the pale glow, endless plains painted silver, the black ridges of the Maya rising sharp against the stars. The wind rushed through the gullies, tugging at his coat, whistling like some unseen choir. Each step called back memories. He remembered the weight of Shadow's body dragging through the snow, the sting of blood and ice on his hands. He remembered Ember tugging at his sleeve with foe's teeth, Storm's laughter in every gallop, Cole's steady thump against the boards. He remembered Ash pressing his pale head against his shoulder, silent, steady. The closer he came, the faster his heart beat. It was not fear. It was the same tremor he had felt marching back into a battlefield long ago, knowing something awaited that would mark him forever. The plains opened before him, a canvas of frost and moonlight. At first there was only silence, then a sound, a tremor, distant but rising like the drumbeat of war. Hooves, many hooves. He crested a rise and saw them. The herd burst across the clunet. Open ground, a tide of muscle and fire manes whipping white and black and red beneath the moon. Their cries rolled like thunder. Their hooves struck sparks against the frozen earth. And at their head, he saw him, Ash. The stallion was vast, larger even than Shadow had ever been. His coat glowed, under the moon, white as burning magnesium mane, rippling like banners in the wind. His eyes shone with a light that seemed more spirit than flesh, as if the very night had chosen him as its champion. The herd fanned out behind him, forming a wide arc, enclosing the field, not hostile, but regal a guard, flanking their king. Ash halted, stamping the ground, and raised his head high. His whinnies shattered the silence, carried far across the valley, a cry so fierce and beautiful that Jack felt his knees weaken. It was not the scream of a beast, it was the proclamation of a sovereign. Tears stung Jack's eyes. He had waited 15 years for this sound, and it shook the marrow of his bones. Slowly, Ash began to move forward. Each step was deliberate, echoing in Jack's chest like the tick of a clock. The herd remained still, watching the air humming with their breath. Jack stood rooted, his body trembling, and with age, his eyes never leaving the stallion. He whispered, voice cracking, "You remember me, don't you?" Ash's pace slowed. His ears twitched, his eyes fixed sharp as blades on the old man. He stopped just before him, close enough that Jack could feel the warmth of his breath. The stallion lowered his head, bowing until his muzzle hovered inches from Jack's chest. Jack's lips quivered. "You do remember." In Ash's gaze, he saw everything the night he dragged Shadow bleeding through the snow. Then the storm, when 4 Faws came screaming into the world. The long years of whispers and jeers, the faith that had never let him turn away. He saw Shadow herself, her golden eyes alive in her son. He saw Storm, Ember, Coal spirits bound in this one white giant before him. It was more than memory. It was recognition. It was covenant. Jack reached out with a hand that shook not from fear, but from the weight of the moment, and laid his fingers against the thick mane. The hair was coarse, alive with heat. For a heartbeat, he was no longer old. He was the soldier again, the comrade, the man with a unit at his side. The herd did not move. Not one hoof stamped in protest. They stood in silence, witnesses to the reunion. Jack's voice trembled as he whispered, "I'm not alone. Not anymore." His eyes closed, tears streaking his weathered cheeks. "If I go now, I can go in peace." Ash's head pressed gently into his shoulder, a gesture so human that Jack let out a broken laugh. It was the answer he had waited his life for. The two of them stood together under the moon ghost and stallion soldier and king. When at last Jack stepped back, he felt no regret, only completion. He turned slowly, his joints stiff, his breath ragged, and began to walk away. Behind him, Ash lifted his head and whinnied again. The sound rolled across the plains, piercing the night, rising above the plain, ridges of Black Mesa, and spilling into the valley beyond. Every ear in Iron Creek heard it. Ranchers sitting at their windows froze mugs of coffee halfway to their lips. Children stirred in their beds, whispering into the dark. Old men swore under their breath that it was an omen, a sign of blessing or a curse, depending on what heart received it. The cry echoed long after silence fell. And in that silence, the town shivered. They never forgot that night. And so, Iron Creek's legend deepened. No longer just whispers of a black mare and her foes, but the tale of the ghost and the white stallion who met beneath the moon, and the bond that turned exile into eternity. Grace Nolan was 27 the first time she heard Iron Creek spoken of as more than a dot on a map. She had grown up in Cheyenne, the daughter of a machinist and a school teacher, a girl who learned early to listen for stories hidden in ordinary places. She was not interested in politics or scandals. Her notebook filled instead with sketches of mountains of hawks wheeling over plains of people who lived close to the edge of wilderness. When whispers reached the newsroom of the Cheyenne Herald, whispers about a white stallion on the mesa, a creature seen under the full moon, leading a herd unlike any other, Grace's curiosity sharpened. Folklore, one editor scoffed. Country superstition. But Grace heard something else in the rumor. Farmers swore the stallion's herd did not raid crops or scatter cattle. On the contrary, they seemed to patrol the borders, driving away the truly wild bands. One woman told her over the phone, "I saw it with my own eyes, a shadow moving like snow come alive." "Don't you write it like a carnival trick, miss. This one's real." Grace booked a seat on the next stage out of Cheyenne. Iron Creek was small, fewer than 500 souls, a scattering of wood and brick huddled against winter's edge. She asked about the horse at the mercantile, and received only smirks. At the saloon, rough voices told her, "Saw a white monster running under the moon. Devil or angel, take your pick." At the churchyard, one farmer muttered, "That horse is no curse. It's a blessing. Ours is the only land spared." But when she pressed for detail, people turned key. They crossed their arms, lowered their voices, and said almost in unison, "If you want the truth, ask the barn ghost." She had expected names. What she found instead was a legend. The cabin stood on the edge of the forest, smoke curling from a bent stovepipe, shutters creaking in the wind. The boards were gray, the roof patched with tin. No sign of welcome marked the place yet. Grace felt her pulse quicken as she climbed the path. She knocked. The man who opened the door was thin as winter branches. His hair was white, his face lined deep, but his eyes, those eyes, were startlingly alive, sharp as rifle sights. He studied her in silence. "My name is Grace Nolan," she said, clutching her notebook as if it were a shield. "I'm a journalist with the Cheyenne Herald. I came to ask about the horses." He said nothing for a long time. Then he stepped back and motioned her inside. The cabin was one room lit by a wood stove's glow. A rifle hung on the wall, unused but clean. Beside it, pencil. Sketches curled yellow at the edges. Horses, foss, the outline of a black mare standing tall. "Sit," the old man said at last. His voice was gravel worn thin. "Grace Saturday." He remained standing, one hand resting on the back of a chair, eyes still weighing her. For a moment, she thought he might send her away. Then slowly, he lowered himself onto the opposite stool. "You want the story?" he said. "Yes," she whispered. "You'd better know it's no story at all. It's memory." The fire popped. Shadows danced along the walls. Jack Rohr began to speak. His words were slow, halting, as though he was unrolling a banner long kept folded. He told her of a winter storm decades past when he had stumbled on a black mare bleeding in the snow. He told of the decision that changed his life, that instead of killing her as his brother demanded, he dragged her home, hid her in the old stable, and nursed her as though she were kin. He described the night of lightning and thunder when she labored screaming, and 4 foes spilled into the straw. Storm, coal, ember, and ash, he said, eyes glinting in the firelight. Each of them carved out of that storm, each a reason to keep breathing. He spoke of Maddox's raid of the men, with lanterns and rifles tearing through his barn, and of the desperate midnight march that carried the mayor and her young into the broken shelter of Black Mesa. His voice cracked when he remembered the years after the jeers, the stones, the children shouting "barn ghost" across the fence. "They thought I was a fool," he rasped. "But they never saw the hoof prints circling our land at night. Never saw how no wolf or mustang dared cross. They thought the place haunted. Maybe they were right. Haunted by a promise." When he spoke of Ash, Grace leaned forward. "The smallest," he said softly, "the quietest, always watching, white as Frost. I saw him grow into something I can't name. The others were fine creatures. But Ash, his eyes unfocused as if he were seeing the stallion again. In the flicker of the flames, Ash was meant to lead. I knew it the first time he looked at me, not with fear, but with recognition. His words faltered into coughs. Grace reached for a glass of water, but he waved her off, smiling faintly. I'm not finished yet. She did not write every word. Some she only listened to, letting them sear themselves into memory, knowing she was hearing not folklore, but testimony. The diary of a soldier who had fought a war no one else believed existed. At last, Jack rose stiffly and crossed to a shelf. From it, he lifted a leather-bound book, edges frayed, pages yellowed by time. He laid it gently on the table between them. Grace opened it with reverence. Sketches filled the pages. A mare collapsed in snowblood, smearing the white. 4 faws pressed against her belly, sketched with a hand both rough and tender. A stallion on a ridge-white coat gleaming under a pencil moon. Beside the drawings, words scrolled in uneven script. Sergeant Cole, don't ever leave the dying behind. Grace's throat tightened. This was not just a journal. It was a war record written in straw and blood. A testament to battles fought not with bullets, but with persistence and faith. Jack pushed it toward her. His hand trembled. Take it, he said. Keep it safe. I don't have much time left, and the story can't die with me. Her fingers closed around the leather cover. The weight was greater than paper. It was legacy. His gaze sharpened. Listen well. Don't let the hunters know. If men catch the scent of legend, they'll hound Ash and his kin till they're nothing but hides on a wall. These horses are not trophies. They are a promise kept. Grace's voice was hushed. Why tell me then? Why trust me? For the first time, Jack's face softened into something almost like a smile. Because you write. Because you can shape it into memory, into faith, not bait for bullets. A story worth carrying forward. The fire crackled. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. She closed the notebook, gently, as though afraid to bruise it. Jack leaned back, his breath, shallow but even. From the day I saved Shadow, I swore they'd live, and I swore I'd keep the secret till my last breath. Tonight I've kept it. Tomorrow it's yours. When Grace left the cabin, the sun had slipped low, painting the forest in molten light. Jack sat on the porch, hunched small against the vastness, but still upright, still watching the horizon like a sentry who refused to abandon his post. Grace carried the notebook against her chest. It felt heavier than any draft or column she had ever written. She walked down the dirt track toward town, her boots crunching in the frost. The wind rose from the maya, long and low, and she thought she heard hoofbeats hidden in it, echoes of a herd no one dared name aloud. She stopped, closed her eyes, and listened. The sound faded into silence, but the conviction remained. I'll guard it, she whispered, and I'll tell it right, not as gossip, as legend. When she looked back, the cabin was aback, shadow in the trees. On the porch, the old soldier was still seated, white hair, shining faint in the gravel, dusk. He seemed less a man than the last remnant of another era, a watchman holding a torch for someone else to carry. Grace turned and kept walking, the notebook pressed tight. In her heart, she carried not just ink on paper, but a vow. Jack Rohr died in his sleep 3 months after Grace Nolan first sat in his cabin and listened to the firelight story of Shadow and Ash. There was no fanfare, no ceremony, just a cold morning when the smoke failed to rise from the crooked stovepipe, and a neighbor passing by found the old soldier still in his chair, his face turned toward the window as if he had been watching the forest to the end. News of his death rippled through Iron Creek in a way that revealed more than it intended. Some shrugged and muttered that the town's strangest man had finally joined the graveyard of eccentrics. Others lowered their voices, remembering the solitary figure who had endured ridicule, yet never lashed back. The children who had once hurled stones whispered now that the barn ghost had vanished, leaving the barn to the real ghosts. Grace returned as soon as she could. The cabin was already being considered for auction, the town eager to reclaim the property. She bid quietly, firmly using her savings and a portion advanced from the Herald. When the papers were signed, she unlocked the door and stepped back into the room where Jack's voice still seemed to linger in the smoke-stained rafters. She left it almost untouched. The sketches remained on the wall. The rifle stayed above the hearth. She framed one, drawing from his notebook, shadows surrounded by 4 faws, and hung it above the mantel like an altar. On a small table, she set a lantern, a pressed wildflower, and a photo she had managed to find of Jack, in uniform, young and straight-backed medals across his chest. It was not a shrine, not quite, but it was remembrance. The cabin would serve a new purpose, not just shelter for an old soldier, but a research post, a place to keep vigil for the herd that had given him life. Grace did not let the story rest with her, alone. Her first articles appeared in the Cheyenne Herald under the title, The Guardians of Black Mesa. She refused the language of fear or superstition. No devil horses, no phantoms. Instead, she wrote of ecology, of patterns of balance. Unlike the wild bands that ravage fences and steal pasture, she wrote, the Black Mesa herd has established territory of its own. Their movements form a protective ring around Iron Creek. They do not raid, they repel. Her words caught attention. Scientists from the university wrote back. Biologists came with notebooks and trapped cameras studying the prints and tufts of hair she showed them. Grace led them up the same trails Jack once walked, pointing out the ridge lines, the hoof-worn paths that curved like boundaries no map had drawn. The evidence was undeniable. Footage from the cameras showed the herd passing in moonlight, great bodies moving in, disciplined formation, circling, retreating, never once crossing into farmland. It was not instinct alone, it was strategy. Grace felt a shiver each time she reviewed the footage. She thought of Ash, the white stallion Jack had, described and imagined him at the head of the column, eyes burning with intelligence. She wrote again, "This is not just a herd, it is a guardianship, led not by hunger but by will." Iron Creek, however, was not won so easily. At the first town meeting, she attended, voices rose hot and hostile. "Guardians? That's a pretty word for pests," one rancher spat. "I've lost cattle 3 winters in a row. Who's to say they won't turn next? They'll eat us bare," another snapped. "Turn Black Mesa into dust, and then come for our fields, and you want to protect them?" Grace stood at the front, hand steady on the lectern. She did not shout, she showed. Photographs, hoof prints circling but never crossing fence lines. Images of wild mustangs driven back into ravines. She laid out numbers. In 15 years, not one documented raid from the Black Mesa herd. And finally, she repeated Jack's words. "These horses are not just animals, they are a promise." The room quieted. Not all were convinced, but some remembered. They remembered how years of devastation from wild herds had eased after the white stallion appeared. They remembered the absence of trampled fences, the calm of their pastures. The shift began with a handful of farmers, who grudgingly admitted maybe they keep worse ones away. Then came the silence of those who could not argue with the evidence. By the end of the meeting, suspicion had not vanished, but it had weakened. Grace knew battles were not won in one night. She had patience, and she had Jack's memory to fortify her. She carried the fight upward. Letters to Cheyenne multiplied. Reports filed with the state gained traction. Biologists signed petitions citing the herd as unique in behavior and worthy of preservation. Grace became their translator, turning scientific jargon into words the public could feel. It took years of rejection of edits, of meetings where her voice was drowned out. But she persisted. And then one spring morning, the proclamation came through the state of Wyoming would designate Black Mesa as an official wild horse reserve with Iron Creek as its steward. The announcement rang through the valley like a bell, Iron Creek once whispered. About as cursed found itself on maps as a destination. Tourists arrived with binoculars and cameras, hoping for a glimpse of the white stallion and his kin. Scientists set up observation blinds. The town, long starved of opportunity, found a new source of income in the very legend it had once feared. Signs were painted and hung at the edge of town. "Welcome to Iron Creek, land of the white stallion," and for the first time, the name Jack Rohr was spoken in public with respect. Not barn ghost, not fool, but man, a soldier who had kept faith with a herd no one else believed in. Grace became something she had never expected. The reporter was still in her, but now she was more. She was caretaker, organizer, voice, and face of the movement. People began to call her horsewoman, half in est, half in awe. Unlike Jack, she was not outcast. She walked openly in the street. Children running up to tug her sleeve and ask for stories. She taught them not to throw stones at the stable ruins, but to draw horses on their school walls. She read aloud from Jack's notebook in classrooms, telling them of Shadow, And the night the storm brought 4 foes into the world. They are not monsters, she told them. They are guardians, and they belong here as much as we do. Children went home and told their parents who had once scoffed, and slowly the myth changed shape. No longer fear, no longer shame, but legend. In the cabin, Grace kept writing. She filled her own notebooks with observations, behaviors, sketches caught from binoculars, Ash rearing on a ridge, his mane silver under the moon, the herd moving in disciplined arcs across the mesa. She drafted a book not as sensationalism, but as testimony, the continuation of Jack's vow. On nights when the moon rose full, she would sit on the porch of the cabin with a mug of coffee and listen. Often faintly, she would hear it, the pounding of hooves far away, the ripple of voices carried on, the wind. She knew some might belong to Ash, others to his sons or grandsons. She never tried to approach too close. She knew the boundary, the respect. But in those sounds, she felt his presence. And, through him, Jack's. By the year 2050, Iron Creek was no longer the wind-curd, suspicious little town Jack Rohr had once haunted. It had grown not into a city, never that, but into a community shaped by the presence of the Black Mesa Reserve. The reserve had brought scientists, students, and visitors from far beyond Wyoming. More importantly, it had reshaped the people who lived closest at the schoolhouse. Each autumn carried a tradition. In art class, the children spread paper across their desks and dipped brushes into bright paints. Horses filled the pages, some clumsy, some graceful, all bold. 2 figures appeared again and again, Shadow the black mare who had begun the tale, and Ash, the great white stallion, who had once led the herd beneath the silver moon. The children did not speak of fear. They did not throw stones as their grandparents once had. Instead, they whispered stories with wide eyes, how Shadow had been saved by a soldier, how Ash had grown into a guardian, how the herd had kept their field safe when wild mustangs prowled. They called them Shadow and Ash. In their drawings, the pair stood together, darkness and light, suffering and hope, 2 halves of a single whole. For Iron Creek, they were not just animals, they were symbols of balance, living proof that even what was feared could become a blessing. In the long winters, when the snow piled against door frames and the wind howled through the pines, families gathered around wood stoves. Children curled under blankets, elders leaned forward in rocking chairs, and the oldest voices in town took up the story. Long ago, one gay-haired man would begin. A poor veteran named Jack Rohr found a dying horse in the storm. Everyone said to leave it. Everyone said it was cursed. The children's eyes grew wide, reflecting firelight. But Jack Barn Ghost, they called him, he didn't turn away. He carried that great black mare into his barn, nursed her back, and kept her safe, though the whole town spat at him. And one night, when the thunder split the sky, she gave birth to 4 foes. The fire crackled, and the voice would lower as though sharing a secret. From those foes came Ash, the white one, bright as the moon. He grew tall, taller than any horse had a right to be. And, when the town wanted him gone, he and his herd stayed, instead patrolling the point, land, keeping the wild raiders away. People thought they heard bells in the night, but it wasn't bells. It was Ash's, call rolling down the mesa. Around the fire, children gasped. Parents nodded, even those who had once doubted. For in Iron Creek, the legend had become not folklore, but heritage. The herd itself remained. On nights when the moon rode high, its light spilling silver across the basalt ridges, the sound of hooves drifted down like thunder rolling through stone. The people of Iron Creek had grown accustomed to it. They no longer clutched rifles or crossed themselves. They listened, comforted. Visitors came from far away to see it. They camped on the edge of the reserve, straining for the sight of a shadow, crossing the ridge line or the cry that echoed like a trumpet across the plains. They called it the night bell. Some claimed it rang at the same hour each evening. Others swore it came only when danger loomed. Whatever the truth, it lured scientists and dreamers alike, biologists with drones and cameras, philosophers with notebooks, but no one could capture its essence. The herd never trespassed into farmland. Instead, they circled the valley in arcs, building a living wall as though guarding something greater than themselves. The townsfolk smiled quietly. They didn't need research to tell them what they already knew. The horses were keeping a promise. At their heart stood Obsidian, the stallion Iron Creek had named with reverence. Massive, dark-coated, yet shimmering silver under the moon, his mane rising jagged like storm winds. When he climbed Black Mesa and reared against the horizon, his cry shook the valley. It wasn't just a sound, it was history erupting, the roar of generations carried in one breath. Children whispered that Obsidian was the war stallion, living heir of Jack Roar's vow. Tourists traveled miles for a glimpse. Locals stood taller when his voice thundered across the plains. By 2050, Iron Creek's nights pulsed with the hoofbeats they called the night bell. Farmers set their clocks by it. Lovers walked the ridges to hear it together. Children fell asleep comforted by its rhythm. The town, once bitter toward horses, now lived by them guarded, defined, redeemed. In the square stood a granite pillar carved from the mesa itself. It bore Jack Roar's name not as a forgotten drifter, but as the soldier who saved Shadow, sparking a legend that reshaped a town. School children recited his tale each autumn, their voices rising into crisp air. He saved the dying, and the herd lived. He kept the promise, and the herd kept it still. And yet, on one winter's night, as the bell rang louder than ever before, the earth itself trembled. Windows rattled, lanterns swayed. From the mesa, Obsidian's cry rose higher, raw, almost frantic. Some swore they saw shapes in the storm behind him, riders cloaked in shadow, echoes of wars long buried. Others whispered it was Jack's spirit, calling the herd once more to battle. No one knew the truth. But one thing was certain, the covenant was not over. The promise Jack made still lived, and Iron Creek understood the legend was not a story finished, but a storm still unfolding. And so, when the night bell thundered across the valley, it carried more than memory. It was a warning, a vow, and perhaps the beginning of the next chapter.